an extra 5,500 parents will pay tax at the higher rate. And in total, 15,500 parents stand to pay extra income tax next year as a result of these changes. Now, can you just imagine the uproar if Joan Burton had announced a cut of €200 per month to child benefit? Well, this measure has the exact same impact. The current system is not perfect, but scrapping the tax credit altogether throws the baby out with the bathwater. It's entirely unfair. So, Ceann Comhairle, despite all the hot air last year about €500 million of wealth taxes and the big talk this year about ending gold-plated entitlements, what we have ended up with is another win for the golden circle of government at the expense of those who don't have a voice. It seems, Ceann Comhairle, that no matter how bad things get in Ireland, some people just never lose.
Would you move the adjournment, please, Deputy? Move the adjournment. I
move the adjournment.
Thank you. Deputy Browne is first speaker, 5 minutes, when the debate resumes. Deputy O'Snuddy on the private members' bill.
Well, Margaret, Minister, I welcome a debate on drugs at any stage, whether it's legal or illegal, because our society has never fully got to grips with drugs as an issue, the abuse of drugs and the availability of drugs. And I understand where Deputy Flanagan is coming from with the motion and his bill, but I won't be supporting it. But I do encourage an open, informed debate on the issue of drugs, and I've encouraged my own party to continuously have that, to look again and again to see if there is an alternative way of tackling the scourge that is drugs, and it's not illegal drugs only, because one of the biggest scourge of drugs in our country is alcohol, and people need to bear that in mind. Because one of the ways I've always measured this debate is, why would we legalise another drug in Ireland when we can't cope with the legal drugs, the alcohol, the tobacco or the prescription drugs? And we've seen the consequences of all of those legal drugs, and then we've also seen the consequences on our society of the illegal drugs. We can't cope with it, and until such time as our society gets to grip with the drugs issue, both those which are legal and those which are illegal, I don't think that we should be going down the road of looking to legalise further drugs. Because the constituency I represent is one of the hardest hits by the drug scourge, the illegal one in Europe, but also the legal one. It is a constituency which has one of the biggest producers of a legal drug, Guinness, in our constituency. But that factory is regulated. It is within the law. It is done in a way that over generations and over decades and centuries, kind of alcohol in our society is regulated. Yet we are still seeing the consequences in A&E every weekend, not even every weekend, every night of the day. We are seeing the consequence of abuse of alcohol in our prisons, in our schools, everywhere in our society, but in particular in those areas which are poorest and most disadvantaged in Ireland. But drugs don't know a class boundary, kind of, because it hits right across. And I've heard the argument that cannabis, weed or hash, whichever name or whichever description we wish to give, kind of isn't that bad. It doesn't really affect people that much. Kind of, sure, wouldn't it be okay, kind of, because there's hundreds of thousands of people in our society who use it or abuse it every day. But because something happens doesn't make it legal and doesn't make it right. Because I remember arguing with somebody about the argument about decriminalising it. And I had some sympathy for that. And I understand the consequences kind of for young people who are caught with a few spliffs. Kind of that can have consequences for the rest of their lives. But if we were to use the same argument, then why not decriminalise joyriding or other activities that young people have got involved in the past? The way of tackling people who are convicted, who have caught on the wrong side of the law for what some people would term minor offences, is through kind of a legislation to spend convictions legislation. So if somebody is 15 or 16 or 20 or whatever, happens to get caught up in illegal drug activity for their own use, and that there is a way out in the future, that forever and a day that they are not condemned to suffer the consequences of a mistake or several small mistakes. But there is another side to the illegal drug activities in our society, and it is that which I would caution against any change, because the very people who have benefited from a lack of seriousness on the drugs issue in our society, a lack of a proper planned approach to drugs, whether it's the criminal response coupled with the response in terms of mental health, in terms of self-awareness in schools. People who've benefited are the drug dealers. And because one drug would be legalised, won't prevent them from plying their trade. And I take no truck in the argument, oh, well, the hash head down the road kind of is okay. So he's only selling that. He doesn't do anything else. Well, I know in my community and in my constituency and right across this city, the very same people are the ones who are bringing in the guns, the heroin and the cocaine into this country, who are also involved in the cannabis trade. And I have seen, and everybody has seen, the consequences of that trade. The consequences on the street, young people getting caught up in violence, intimidation, in jail, or dead as a consequence of drugs war, or in consequences of being in debt to a local drug dealer, whether it's a debt from weed or from cocaine. That is the facts in our communities, and we have seen whole communities destroyed because of that. And people will say, well, kind of, obviously the war on drugs has failed. Well, I don't believe it was ever fully declared by the state. We are an island nation, kind of, we could have done a lot more to prevent the importation of cocaine, heroin and hash into our country. We could have done a lot more in terms of capturing young people at an early age to ensure that they didn't become dependent on any drug, whether it was legal or illegal. I think we could have done a lot more to ensure that our education purpose was right. For instance, in this area, as we speak, there is no drugs unit tied to Kevin Street Garda Station, one of the areas which covers one of the most hardest hit by the drug scourge in this city. Now, the problem is to do with people getting promoted and everything else, but at this very stage, there is no drugs unit. And also, over the years, there hasn't been enough concentration within the Garda Síochána on drugs units. There hasn't been enough concentration by the state in terms of subsidising or funding the drugs task forces. So, for instance, in this budget, once again, kind of the government implements a 7% cut on the budget of those who are specifically tasked to try and address the problem of illegal drugs and legal drugs, because only a few years ago, kind of under the Fianna Fáil government, they decided that task forces should also deal with the questions of alcohol. I have absolutely no problem with that, but they didn't increase the budget, and ever since then the budgets for task forces has been cut. What type of message goes out kind of to those who are involved in trying to highlight the dangers of drugs when you're continuously cutting it? So I'd urge the Minister, at the very least as part of this debate, to rethink that 7% cut that was announced in the budget. kind of one of the concerns I have in this issue is that there's been a systematic increase in the potency of cannabis in recent years and the consequences to the abusers. So, for instance, the THT, the psychoactive ingredient which gives an individual a high or a euphoric feeling, has increased. So in hash, it's gone from 3% to nearly 15% in some cases, but that in weed it can range from 15% to 40%, and that is absolutely scary because there is consequence to an increase in that potency and the decrease that's happening in terms of the anti-psychotic element, which if you want, is the counterbalance. So at the moment, the drugs that are being sold in Ireland are increasing in potency, and there is a consequence in terms of aggression, in terms of paranoia, irritability, disturbed sleep, psychological dependence, but also in terms of mental health, self-harm, suicidal tendencies, and involvement then also because of the dependency in criminal gangs and the like.
Deputy.
So I would urge people to continue with the debate, to continue to look at it, but also to look at the other alternative to ensure that we ramp up the war on drugs, illegal and legal, in this country.
Now calling Deputy Robert Dowd to sharing time with Deputies Mulhern, Connaughton, Durkin, Maloney, Mitchell O'Connor and Keating. Deputy Durkin and Connaughton are sharing a 5-minute slot. Deputy Dowd, you have 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Garmal, that's a count corner. In my remarks on this subject, I really wanted to dwell on the wider issue rather than just cannabis. And in that sense, I welcome the fact that there is a motion on drugs being discussed, even if it's only on one relatively minor drug in terms of harm being done. I'm calling on the government to set up a high-powered committee to report on how best to tackle illegal drugs and drug-related crime within a year. And I'm doing so because every day in my constituency, I see the huge negative effect of both legal and illegal drugs on many parts of the community I represent. And this can take effect in a number of ways: antisocial behaviour, intimidation, violence and even death. In one area of my constituency, which overlaps with a neighbouring constituency, there have been 16 murders in the last 4 years. Many, if not most, of these deaths bear a relationship with drugs, again, either legal or illegal. And almost as bad as that is the fact that there have been attempted murders, sometimes with really grim results. And for example, in one case that I personally know, a totally innocent man shot and left unable to speak and unable to walk. And that is why I am calling for immediate action in terms of examining how best to deal with the whole wider issue of tackling illegal drugs, because they are so linked with criminality that it is, we are not getting on top of it. I mean, in conversations I've had with local Gardaí, they say that at most they catch 10% of what comes in illegally. So we have to recognise that our present approach is not working. And I mean, the whole issue of cannabis is a sort of a minor aspect of this whole thing. I'm very conscious of the fact that because Ireland is a small country, whatever we do, either in relation to cannabis or in relation to other drugs, it would probably be better if we could work out a cross-border agreement as to how to deal with drugs. Although in the meantime, I think we could learn something from the experience of Portugal, which, from what I can find out, seems to tackle not so much anybody who is handling small amounts of drugs for themselves, but goes after the people who are doing the supplying. And there, in Portugal, drug abuse amongst 13 to 15-year-olds since 2001 has fallen from 14.1% to 10%. HIV infection has dropped 17%, and drug trafficking dropped, and also drug-related deaths has fallen by about a third. So I do think we have a great deal of work to do to tackle the issue generally. And as I say, I understand that, you know, cannabis in this regard is a very minor matter. But again, in conclusion, if I can go back to my original point, I really think the government needs to set up a high-powered committee to report within a year on how best to tackle illegal drugs and drug-related crime. And it is the most vulnerable communities who have least voice in this chamber who would benefit most from that. And for that reason, I feel it is my duty to speak up for them so that they stop suffering in the way that they have had to suffer for so long. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Michelle Mulhern.
Thank you, Cian Corla. The push to legalise cannabis, thanks to social media and, of course, the current proponents, seems new, but it is not. This is, in fact, a tired old story, rehashing a case, so to speak, that has already been lost some decades ago. Generations past, in particular during the freewheeling decade of the 60s in both Europe and the United States, seriously experimented openly with all sorts of so-called mind-expanding drugs, including cannabis. This included people from all walks of society and professionals from all disciplines who at the time heralded that drug-embracing era as an advancement for civilization and mankind and as a gateway to enlightenment. However, that lifestyle was ultimately left behind by most and ultimately rejected as a youth's urge to rebel is tempered by life's personal experience and reveals the sobering truth about taking drugs. These people are the grandparents of today. They have, in effect, heard it all before. They could tell us things, impart wisdom, if we could only listen. So cannabis and these many other drugs remained banned substances in many of these Western countries, and for very good reason. They are drugs. Besides food, drink and clean air, human health requires a healthy mind. Everything else can be considered secondary, and drugs in particular are an antidote to ill health and are prescribed by qualified doctors to aid recovery or to ease discomfort for the incurable. In fact, the significant, compelling body of medical evidence and research shows the misuse of cannabis, especially long-term use, poses a significant risk of heart and lung problems and cancer, and of serious mental health problems, including paranoia, schizophrenia and depression. Frighteningly, from a young age, its use can impair brain development. Therefore, the push to legalise banned substances by proponents outside the medical profession is nothing more than self-indulgence disguised as concern for the ill or the economy. It is this duplicity that makes the case for the drug seem like a product of its own influence, rather than that of sound judgment. Mind-bending drugs are just that, mind-bending, impairing judgment and therefore rendering the user unfit to make judgments for the reasonable-minded citizens of any serious nation and its governing bodies. But there is no admission to this by proponents. We do not wish to have our police or doctors or judges or our policy makers under any influence other than a sound mind. Who can say precisely what one under the influence is thinking, or channeling for that matter, that they might be held accountable to the rest of society? We do not want to ride buses, trains or planes driven by drivers or pilots under the influence of anything other than their training and experience that featured in their job description when they interviewed for the job. Those who wish to see a banned substance legalised on no ground other than it's harmless, or the ground that law enforcement has failed to curb the problem, are under an influence that the serious, sober-minded could never possibly understand or subscribe to. It would seem, in the mind-altered state, anything is possible. One main reason the substance in question remains banned, as I have alluded to, is control. Control as to how we might govern its use, as we do with alcohol and to a lesser extent tobacco, and control by the user. One cannot prescribe the minimum amount for safe use nor control its abuse. Those who take it are under an influence hard or impossible to detect. What that influence becomes when combined with alcohol and other prescribed drugs is unknown. Older societies, such as the Native American Indians, restricted its use to the initiated, and its social use was always within prescribed rituals with very specific goals. Its use by individuals indiscriminately was taboo and would have incurred penalties because it was deemed antisocial. Today, the fragmentation of society as it is would make the lift of the ban on the use of cannabis, no doubt increasing its use, a dangerous social experiment with no means of controlling its abuse by a minority of people who are susceptible to influences that lead to antisocial behaviour. The Gardaí, as it is, have their work cut out for them in this country, policing the parameters of the legal use of alcohol. Adding drugs to that mix would be irresponsible of any government, if not downright reckless endangerment of our citizens. I completely oppose the motion here tonight.
Thank you. I now call on Deputy Paul Connaughton, sharing his time with Deputy Durkin. 2.5 minutes each.
Perfect. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this and very much welcome the debate. I think one of the things I find a bit frustrating with private members' business, it'd be very easy to come in and just knock this and say we can't do it and what's the point of debating it. I think we have to start with the reality in this situation is that this drug is available the length and breadth of this country in every town and every village. And to not start with that context would be misleading from the beginning. So this drug does exist, people have access to it, and what we want to do about that is going to be the next step after that. I would have my own issues and my own concerns in relation to this. I wouldn't support the full legalisation of this drug, but to say that it's not accessible to people at the moment would be wrong beyond belief. I do have no issue whatsoever with actually legalising it for medical reasons. We all have people in and out of our clinics who've been told by their GPs and their doctors that this drug, for medical reasons, will give them much comfort and much support. And I think that has to be looked at. And I believe the Minister mentioned something last night in relation to Sativex eventually becoming on the market, and that's to be very welcome. But I do think there's one other area we really have to focus on this debate that seems to get lost. First of all, we cannot compare cannabis to the rest of the drugs. We talk about heroin, we talk about cocaine. We can lump them all in together if we want, but that simply wouldn't be the reality of the situation. So we have to take the motion as what it is in relation to this. What I would like to say is there will be people in this room tonight and who are going to vote against this, maybe a small number, but they're hypocrites. Because they'll have no issue with someone having 2 or 3 pints at night and driving home. So the issue with alcohol, well, no, that's not such an issue. But when it comes to this, they'll slap it down straight away and say, no, we can't do it whatsoever.
No, may the one.
Now, I'm not agreeing with legalising cannabis because of the alcohol situation, but we can't have it both ways. Alcohol is a drug as much as cannabis is a drug. There are more families, the length and breadth of this country, who've had their lives destroyed by the misuse and the abuse of alcohol as much as anything to do with illegal drugs. Again, I'm not saying legalise cannabis for that reason, but we can't be so hypocritical as to say they're not even linked in one way. In 2.5 minutes, even in 3 hours, it is not possible to discuss this in as much detail as it should be. Tonight should not be the end of this debate. It really should just be the beginning of it. I'm not saying legalise it completely, but we have to look at all the options. We cannot keep coming in here and saying one thing and going outside and saying another. We have an issue in this country with alcohol as much as we do with drugs. Unless we face up to that, we cannot have an honest debate about this one way or another. Thank you.
Chuck de Bernard Durkin.
I have to say that I am totally opposed to the proposal, and I want to just mention a few things. First of all, the availability of a particular drug, whether it's freely available or not, is not necessarily the issue. The issue is whether it is good for the person who takes it, and whether it should be uncontrolled. And obviously, there are properties that are beneficial to people in pain and so on and so forth, and we recognise that. The way to do that, of course, is by way of prescription, not the way that has been suggested. Because remember one thing, it is habit forming. I was one of the people who became involved some years ago in the Amsterdam project, the Zurich experiment, and I, along with the late Tony Gregory and a number of other people in this House, visited those areas at that particular time to find out how the liberalisation of certain drugs had worked there, and it didn't, is the answer. It led to increased abuse. It was uncontrolled abuse, and it is intrinsically bad to suggest that, in this kind of situation, it is better than the situation we have. It isn't. And the suggestions and the references made to Portugal. The reason that drug abuse has dropped in Portugal is because the police have taken out the barons, the supply chain. And that's the reason. And that was proven beyond any shadow of doubt. And Deputy Flanagan mentioned last night, that this was mentioned in one of the debates last night. That's the answer to it. That's the answer to the question. The other point I want to mention is this, is that the gateway element is very, very, very dangerous. And I don't know whether we realise what we're talking about or not. But if we suggest in this House that young people in the market, out in the community, are going to be better served by a more availability of a drug which is a gateway drug. I'm afraid we're wrong, and we're giving a very bad example, and we shouldn't go down that particular road. There is no scientific evidence to suggest or to support the suggestion other than opinions expressed by people and in relation to whom there are other opinions equally held and strong. I want to finish with this one, and just for the sake of argument. When prohibition in relation to, and I recognise the points in relation to alcohol, when prohibition ended in the United States, use of alcohol increased by 4,000%.
Deputy Eamon Maloney. It's 5 minutes.
Firstly, can I just say that as a citizen of the state that we enjoy our drugs in Ireland. They're popular. Be it the national drug referred to earlier, alcohol, and all of the other ones. I think probably cannabis is probably the second on the chart in terms of popularity, given that we're in a recession. However, we're back in the days of the Celtic Tiger, when all the yuppies had enough money to buy lines of Coke. Coke replaced other drugs, and for a period became the second most popular one. But I agree with some of the points that have been made, but we have to be careful here, you know, as legislators about when dealing with this issue, because we have to look at it, I think, in terms of its totality. And you know, I won't be supporting the thing. I won't be supporting the motion. But can I just say this? That I was at one of the recent, as other members here, where the recent report from the Rape Crisis Centre and also the domestic violence report. I cannot remember to my shame. But interesting, someone made a point talking about the domestic violence thing and separately the rape thing, about the effect on children and families, you know. And I think we have to sort of, all of us have to change our sort of attitude to this thing, that that we can use, you know, that the use of cannabis or Coke is a sort of a very privileged individual choice and a right worth dying for. But I'll tell you that if you sit down and read either of these reports and your stomach doesn't turn over on the effect, firstly in relation to alcohol, and secondly in relation to weed, because it's not just a simple matter of saying we can legislate for another drug and that it's up to the individual and that that's the person. That's a load of rubbish. It's a load of rubbish. There are thousands of kids in care tonight, in care, because of the national drug, followed by the one we're discussing here, etc., etc. And can I just to add to that, I think there is a bit of a change in fairness to this Dáil. I hear things here which, well, like some others, I'm not here very long, fortunately, but I've heard some which are sort of encouraging signs. Like when you hear people talk about even using the phrase, I never thought I'd hear it here, people using the phrase alcohol and other drugs. Let's grow up about this thing and say it. Just say it. And I mean, it's okay for, I don't know about the rest of you, but I mean, I'm a user. I enjoy my porter. I make no, but I don't make a profession of it, you know? It's not, but we have to be, I think as legislators, we have to be sort of brave at this thing. But I think perhaps we might focus on doing something about the national drug before we bring another monster on board. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. And one of the best illustrations of this, and I know you did your best, colleague Minister White, but I think to our shame, we had a recent report on the below-cost selling. I won't comment on, it's irrelevant what my own views about that. But the other thing about sponsorship, you know, the alcohol industry sponsoring sport events and festivals, etc. I mean, do we not get it why the alcohol industry sponsors sporting bodies and festivals? They don't do it primarily to promote drink. They don't. That's not the principal reason. They do it because it gives the edge in terms of the image and the brand and this old paddy whackery thing that, sure, what did a few drinks ever do to a man? You know, He's only had a few pints, etc. Read the report on domestic violence. You'll see what a few pints does for some guys. Okay, some people can control the thing. There are men and women who've never been drunk in their lives and have no ambition to be. But let us be honest about this. There are people who cannot handle it, and if there's any doubts about that, look at the report on the rape. As a man, an Irishman, it makes you feel ashamed of what's going on. And without getting into the details, child abuse in this country. And it is primarily, not exclusively, but primarily related to the national drug. But we can't deal with it. And it is disappointing that, I've always had a very clear view about it, and the Minister is aware of this. I disapprove of any alcohol company sponsoring any sporting body. I think when a child goes into the Aviva or into Croke Park, the last thing they want to see is the national drug advertised.
Now call Deputy Mary Mitchell O'Connor.
Thank
5
you.
minutes.
Cathaoirleach, as a member of the Oireachtas Joint Committee on Health and Children, I am totally opposed to this ill-thought-out bill. This bill is unreasonable and, frankly, reckless and dangerous. Make no mistake about it, cannabis can have a devastating effect on an individual's mental and physical health. I strongly oppose this bill for the following reasons. Firstly, that the argument that the substance is not addictive is frankly laughable, frankly dopey. Addiction is described as creating an insatiable craving for a substance that produces a desired result. The use of cannabis produces an effect that is highly addictive. Secondly, the health effects of cannabis cannot be ignored. I believe that the resulting impacts of recreational use negate the pro-arguments for legalising cannabis. Studies have shown that an individual's mental health is particularly vulnerable to cannabis use and its negative effects. For example, research has shown that the number of those suffering from depression doubled, and anxiety was 5 times higher in users than non-users. And in the short term, users may also experience paranoia or hallucinations. Cannabis has also been shown to increase the risk of lung cancer, increasing the likelihood by 8% every year of use. It can increase an individual's heart rate and the likelihood of a stroke. I question the introduction of this bill, that it would propagate the use of a substance that it could only serve to negatively impact the health of our society. As a parent, the negative effects cannabis has on young people causes me great concern. I would never, ever recommend the use of cannabis to any of my own 2 sons. And I can tell you that I would never, ever recommend its use to any other person. Cannabis use is highest in the people aged 15 to 24 years old. This has worrying implications. This is the period when the brain is developing. Young people using cannabis during this vital stage are at risk of cognitive impairment, decreasing academic performances, or depression. I believe we would be reckless by giving a message to our young people that cannabis is harmless. This bill would undoubtedly see an increase in the availability of cannabis within our society. With regard to Deputy Flanagan's inclusion of age restrictions, I believe that young people will find it easier to access this substance more than ever before. Unfortunately, we need only to look at the figures of underage drinking to know that age restrictions are not always effective. Furthermore, I believe that Provision 17 regarding home-cultivated cannabis is an inadequate measure in preventing young people accessing it in their own homes. The idea that a lockable space will prevent a teenager's curiosity is idealistic and at its best ludicrous. Children always know where the sweets are kept, and teenagers have all discovered their parents' drinks cabinet.
Just 1 minute remaining.
Thank you.
Legalising cannabis simply comes with far too many significant risk factors. Beyond the blatant health ramifications, any attempt to legalise cannabis may set a dangerous precedent in regards to other restricted substances. I fundamentally oppose making cannabis more readily available in our society. It has no benefits that justify the costs that will accrue.
And I now call Deputy Derek Keating.
And I thank the Ceann Comhairle for giving me the opportunity to address Deputy Flanagan's bill entitled the Cannabis Regulation Bill. The opening line of this bill, I think, reveals the true nature of what I consider to be a reckless and insidious proposal by Deputy Flanagan. The purpose of this bill is to provide for the regulation of cannabis for recreational use. Now, I've publicly gone on record previously of my objection to this motion. I stated last year in the House that if adopted, I believe we will see Ireland becoming an even bigger gateway to illegal drugs importation, as we have seen over the last number of years, where massive hauls of cannabis, heroin, cocaine and indeed other illicit substances, including tobacco, have been made available by the gangster underworld in every street, every community, every parish, every town and every city in the Republic of Ireland. A light touch policy being proposed should be rejected out of hand. And I'm calling on those who propose this private member's business and those who are considering supporting it to really think again, to look at the evidence and to consider, for example, the points recently made by Professor Jim Lucy of Trinity College. Professor Lucy has stated in unquestionable evidence that cannabis harms the brain. It is one of the most toxic substances. It rests in the body for up to 90 days. It damages the brain, it impairs the capacity of the user, and indeed it is evident to me that it is a gateway drug. As an elected TD for a community that has been blighted by drug barons, including those in the IRA and other such organisations who hide behind their political agenda, I'm only too familiar with the facts that have been presented to us in the media. I've seen at first hand many hundreds of individuals with zombie-like personalities walking in some areas of my constituency, and I'm sure that most other TDs, if not all TDs, have had similar experiences. And the use of the colloquial love-hate expression comes to mind. Goofing off, strung out, individuals waiting for their next fix, contemplating their next crime and considering their next opportunistic attack on society to feed their habit. And Deputy Flanagan is proposing to make this drug available to beat the drug barons and address the serious crimes that goes with illicit drugs. I believe that Deputy Flanagan is looking too much at one of his close friends, Nidge, of love-hate fame. I'm wondering if Deputy Flanagan would admit to taking or smoking cannabis himself. I am proposing that this bill be rejected out of hand by each and every member of this House and be replaced with a commitment, a renewal to support those professional, voluntary and community leaders who are working at the coalface with drug addicts, some as young as 12 years old, to educate against the effects of the substance, as I've already stated, that some of which has been outlined by Professor Lucy of Trinity College. And I also ask you to consider tonight what message we may send to the 10 and the 12-year-olds whose lives may not have been affected or may not have been damaged by drugs. I believe we are sending those children a message that Ireland today is considering becoming even more tolerant of illegal and dangerous drugs. This bill also proposes that the government supports the production and the retailing of cannabis and cannabis products. Can I see a time when there will be the Deputy Ming Flanagan's Farmers Market, buy one, get one free? Not in retailing, it shouldn't be allowed. On a more serious note, this private member's bill is a dangerous proposal when we consider the research carried out by the National University of Ireland, which showed that up to 8% of children under 10 years of age have used cannabis in the last 12 months. Is Deputy Flanagan serious about this proposal? And who gave him the mandate to represent his constituents Or should I say, are those who gave him the mandate to represent his constituents satisfied that his sole purpose is to legalise illicit drugs and add to the tragedies that already exist throughout most, if not every town in this country? I reject this private member's bill. I also reject the hidden agenda of Deputy Flanagan, and I call on those on the opposite side, from all shades of political opinion, to consider this matter and to withdraw, to ask for this private member's bill to withdraw before this vote tonight.
The next speaking slot is shared by Deputies Claire Daly, Joe Higgins, Catherine Murphy, Joan Collins, John Halligan, 6 minutes each. Deputy Claire Daly.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Well, if I wasn't sure about supporting this legislation, any doubts I might have had have been absolutely quashed now, having listened to the last speaker. I very much welcome this discussion. I fully accept that it is absolutely inevitable that cannabis will be legalised in Ireland. I don't think that's going to happen here tonight because, like everything else, the political establishment lags behind the attitudes of ordinary people on this issue as on everything else. But I think it is an important strategic milestone in moving Irish society forward in discussing issues like this. Now, on Monday morning, I was stopped by a man on the streets of Dublin who asked me what my attitude to Deputy Flanning's legislation was, and when I told him I was supporting it, he thanked me for that, told me a story of how his friend was dying of cancer and how he and 3 of his friends take it in turns to break the law and secure cannabis for that person. And he said, imagine, we're risking a jail sentence for that, for showing decent humanity. Well, he says it's worth it, and it's something I do again, and I think it's something that anybody here would do. And in actual fact, I think this discussion alone will highlight the fact to many Irish citizens that there's very important beneficial uses of cannabis in terms of pain relief, for arthritis, MS, some cancers and so on. And surely we should be promoting, in that medical sense, anything that can make life easier for people who are suffering. How could that be a bad thing? And as the man who stopped me on the street said, at 63 years of age, he said, I think I should be allowed to make decisions like that myself in terms of my life, he said, but also particularly in terms of my death and how that's handled. Let's be clear about this discussion. This bill isn't about introducing cannabis into Ireland. Cannabis is already here. Over 250,000 regular users of cannabis during the last estimate, over 7% of the population. Not just radical young people outlined by Deputy Mulhern, young people, old people, farmers, housewives, workers. Anybody who wants to get cannabis can get it. And this bill is simply about regulating that situation for 2 very simple reasons. Firstly, so that the users of that are not criminalised, and secondly, so that the criminals don't profit from it. It really is, in my opinion, that simple, and for both those reasons, society would be the beneficiary of this legislation being passed. Now, we've had a lot of emails over the last few days from people who are nearly claiming that cannabis is a solution to everything, almost with magical powers. Well, I don't believe in magic, and I don't believe that either. I accept that cannabis isn't harmless. I accept that it can cause problems which vary from user to user, as does alcohol, as do prescription drugs, as do all other drugs in that regard. But criminalising that activity is not a way of dealing with it. This is a health matter and can be only dealt with through the health service. I recognise also that there are no recorded deaths from the use of cannabis alone. Maybe it is a contributing factor. We can make that argument about anything. I could put forward a very rational argument why sugar, fast food, soft drinks and that which contribute to obesity result in deaths and contribute to deaths. Of course that they do. And the fact that I may personally not choose or be interested in particularly smoking cannabis or whatever, I'm not interested in drinking gin or vodka either, it doesn't necessarily mean that the activity should be outlawed. I know in many ways, and it was argued previously by the great socialist Jim Larkin, who used to crusade against alcoholism on the basis that it made workers passive and it suited the establishment, and that argument could be put forward about cannabis and other drugs as well. But what is also a fact is that the proper use of drugs can be beneficial to people for both recreational and medical reasons, and humankind has always operated and worked with drugs, be it back to Homer's The Odyssey or whatever. We've always had it, and to deny that that's a case is just a sick joke. Prohibition doesn't work. The points have been highlighted very well. It creates a black market which is unpoliceable. And it diverts resources away from rehabilitation, from education that could tackle these issues. Now, points have been made about other jurisdictions moving in the direction of legalisation. They've been well articulated. Obviously, the main reason in Portugal was the fact that incarceration was more expensive than treatment. And Deputy Durkin argues that no, the reason was that the barons were taken out of circulation. Well, maybe the barons were able to be taken out of circulation by the police in Portugal because they had a bit of time on their hands to deal with them, because they didn't have to run around arresting young people for using cannabis. And that's one of the essential points put forward by this bill here today. It's a shocking waste of resources. It could be a source of revenue if it was taxed properly, probably yielding hundreds of millions of euro. It would reduce criminal activity. It would reduce stigma and the marginalisation of drug users. It would create a safer environment for those who use and purchase recreational drugs, and it would, in my opinion, control the product of the quality of the product, which is a difficulty. Communities have been devastated by drug use. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But for government backbenchers who have stood over austerity and the poverty and hopelessness that has actually destroyed these communities and tried to blame that on cannabis use is, in my opinion, an absolute and utter disgrace. This is an opportunity to divert resources into revitalising communities, supporting people in education and rehabilitation, and I think it would be a very positive step forward.
Deputy Joe Higgins.
The motion before the Dáil calls for the government to introduce legislation to regulate the cultivation, sale and possession of cannabis and cannabis products in Ireland. I support that, and I welcome the motion put forward by Deputy Luke Flanagan and the discussion that it is giving rise to. It's not a question of being for cannabis use as a recreational outlet, any more than one is for the use of ethyl alcohol or nicotine. It is a matter of realising that drugs have been used by humanity for thousands of years and will continue to be used. Also, it is the reality that just about every drug can have harmful side effects and consequences, especially if overindulged in. The question for me is, what is the most effective means of achieving harm reduction with regard to any drug that is available in society, legally or illegally? How best to have a situation where people can appreciate whatever enjoyment or relaxation they get from drugs, but minimise the ill effects on people and on society. Now, with regard to cannabis, in my view, the best way to do this is to decriminalise and to regulate its production, supply and use. It is beyond doubt that people suffering from some very difficult diseases can ease their suffering by taking cannabis, and it is cruel beyond belief to deny them the right to do that. Cannabis derives from a very natural herb. Why in medicine should it be banned while at the same time multinational pharmaceutical companies make a fortune creating synthetic drugs at a huge cost to achieve what a natural product could do? Now, in a situation where cannabis use is decriminalised totally, I would be absolutely opposed to its production or supply becoming a source of enrichment by private corporations in particular.
there should be a state monopoly in regard to any new drug that would be legalised and regulated in our society. There should be absolutely no advertising, simply factual information on the quality and the quantity, etc., where it would be available, and that would be it. Absolutely ban the cannabis, for example, as a source of profiteering by private corporations. Now, the reality is that the biggest drug pushers in this state are pillars of the Irish establishment and carry on their business quite legally. They push nicotine. In particular, they push ethyl alcohol. And the drug-pushing companies that do this are feted in society. Ministers regularly rub shoulders with them at sporting events and other events that the alcohol industry sponsors. And I've no doubt that some of the politicians that were in here denouncing the emotion also rub shoulders and go to events sponsored by them, and maybe even look for sponsorship for some of their local clubs. There is a massive hypocrisy in this country with regard to the fact that these are extremely dangerous drugs, but they're legal. Yet people want to come in and criminalise a section of the population, and it's quite a substantial section of the population, that wants to use another drug of their choice that arguably, and I think realistically, does far less damage, or has the potential to do that, far less damage. I believe also that the regulation as called for would remove these cutthroat gangsters from the scene and the enrichment of themselves and damage that they do to society, because they do not discriminate between the likes of cannabis and far, far more lethal drugs that have laid havoc in inner city societies and in other parts of the country. They would be seriously weakened if it's taken from the shadows and the reality is recognised. Finally, last Ceann Comhairle, you know, capitalism and its manifestation of austerity creates a society that creates huge problems and harm for people. The current crisis, for example, all over Europe, creating massive suffering, mental, physical, social suffering. It is a fact that many people do seek relief from that suffering in drugs, mostly legal drugs to be honest, overindulge and do themselves huge damage. I believe that in supporting this, also in building a society where there is enough and plenty for every human being, and these pressures brought about by austerity and the financial market system are reduced, are eliminated, so that people can have decent lives and free lives, and then with the less pressure are in a much better frame of mind to choose as to what drugs they use or don't use. And in my view, that it would also lessen hugely the damage that is being done by all drugs, all kinds of drugs, legal drugs, in our society at the present time.
Go Margaret Jacta and Jacta Catherine Murphy. Shane O'Malley.
First of all, I'd like to thank Deputy Flanagan for opening up the opportunity for this debate tonight. And I'd like also to thank him for choosing the way he has done, and that is to put this down as a motion, but also to specify how he sees it rolling out from his point of view. And I think that takes some political courage to specify. And he obviously has put together a very detailed bill, which obviously will be debated in the future. Despite the fact that the production, transportation and sale of cannabis remain illegal in most countries around the world, many of those countries and some of the US states are either changing their laws or considering changing their laws around this issue. I think it's healthy to have a debate rather than burying our heads in the sand and pretending that we don't have an issue to deal with and we don't have a problem to deal with. A substantial portion of our population, somewhere in the region of 150,000 people, are either regular or occasional cannabis users. For those, there are often serious potential consequences if somebody ends up with a conviction. And you know, essentially there can be an issue in relation to not being able to travel to particular countries. There can be an issue in relation to you know, getting particular types of employment. And I think that is obviously a very serious issue for some, and it's a life-changing issue for some. It's also, I think, something worth considering that for those who have been adversely affected by cannabis, very often it isn't open to them to reveal that they have had adverse reactions by virtue of the fact that it is an illegal substance. So I think that there is a potential to actually confront the issue for some people that they don't feel can be confronted at the moment. There's no doubt that the war on drugs has been lost, and only a fraction of the drugs that are seized, you know, account for the amount of drugs that are available in this country. And I think the figure that has been widely talked about is somewhere in the region of 10%. We also now know there's a serious problem with organised crime. And that was initially centred around the drugs industry, if you call it that, but it was centred around Dublin City initially. And by virtue of the fact that it wasn't tackled aggressively enough at that point, obviously it is an issue now for every town and city in this country. If the financial benefit is removed, it's worth asking ourselves the question, what would the result be? And I think it's worthwhile exploring that. In relation to cannabis, in recent years we have seen routine seizures of commercial quantities produced in grow houses. Well, it's only in the last 5 or 6 years this has been a feature. And usually it ends up with somebody who is fairly poverty-stricken, doing this in awful conditions. And they're the ones that end up being the ones that end up being prosecuted, but it's others who end up with the financial gain from that type of aspect of this particular. They're the beneficiaries of this illegal trade. Looking back on prohibition, and it's been mentioned both last night and tonight, in the United States in the 1920s, it didn't work. In that alcohol was produced, and very often it was pretty dangerous what was produced. But it also allowed the mafia to gain a stranglehold, and that grip still remains today. With a 2020 vision, it's great, it's a great thing, but it's difficult to see anything positive that came out of prohibition. However, what we can do is learn from a failed policy that left a very dangerous legacy. Deputy Flanagan has perhaps surprised nobody by bringing this private member's motion forward, and indeed producing legislation as well. And indeed he's put considerable work into producing a bill that would outline how he sees this should be done. But what he has done is, by putting it forward in this way, he's ensured that this opens up the debate, starts the debate, but doesn't conclude it. I, for one, would welcome an opportunity to fully explore the implications of what is contained in the bill, would like to do so in a calm, thoughtful and considered way over a period of time. Deputy Flanagan's views on the legalisation of cannabis may be more mainstream today when they were some years ago when he first began raising the subject. His approach is shared, though, today by people like the Chief Constable of Durham, Mike Barton, who went considerably further in calling for the decriminalisation of Class A drugs. He said prohibition had put billions of pounds into the hands of criminals. He was not denying that drugs did harm. He was arguing that prohibition didn't work. He called for an open debate on the problems caused by drugs. And I would like that open debate in a calm and measured way. Like the amendment that's tabled by government tonight, the Home Office responded in the same way to the Chief Constable. I'm not going to go into the time of my colleagues here, so I just would welcome some of the, I won't go I'd just like to acknowledge some of the the contributions from the other side of the House, from the like of Deputy Dowds, Deputy McNamara and indeed Deputy Coyne. I think that it's time that we did allow a time for an open debate, and I think that what was suggested about maybe putting 12 months aside, looking at it in a thoughtful way, would be a better way of approaching this.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you.
I'll call Deputy Joan Collins. 6 minutes.
I welcome the opportunity to debate this issue and what is a very complex question. Even though the bill will be voted down, there is a need for an ongoing informed debate on the issues, and I commend Deputy Flanagan for introducing this motion into the chamber. The drug problem in our society is not a question of just cannabis use. It is the estimated 20,000 heroin addicts in the country. It is the 10,000 people on so-called treatment using methadone, while there are only 38 detox beds in the whole country. It is the existence of criminal gangs who are terrorising families